Cobb legal aid attorney Jennifer Yankulova works providing legal assistance to the low-income population in Cobb County. She specializes in housing law, including litigation and community outreach. She will be speaking today on the access to justice. Let us welcome Jennifer Yankulova.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored to be here today to talk to you guys about issues and access to justice, specifically relating to housing law. A little bit about who I am and what I do. My name is Jennifer Yankulova. I'm an attorney with Cobb Legal Aid. It's part of Atlanta Legal Aid. I focus on housing litigation, so that's a lot of eviction defense, going after landlords who won't make repairs, dealing with federal legal issues, subsidized housing. I do a lot of community outreach. I staff our eviction clinic at the courthouse. I'm part of the community. We have a strategy team for homelessness as part of the Cobb Collaborative that I chair. So this is a daily thing for me, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about this topic. I work at Cobb Legal Aid, which is part of Atlanta Legal Aid. We have offices all over the metro area. We do not do criminal law, so we're not public defenders, but we do a variety of civil litigation, and a lot of what we do is advice. So now we're going to play a short video to kind of give you an introduction to what legal aid is, what do we do.
The whole idea of our legal system is that each side gets to have their say.
We're an independent, nonprofit law firm. A lot of people confuse us with the public defenders because I guess they don't realize that poor people might need lawyers in other situations. Having a lawyer can make all the difference in the world.
We're the civil legal ER, the emergency room for people who are low income, victims of domestic violence, people who are in imminent danger of losing their housing, people who are being denied public benefits such that they don't have enough food.
When something goes wrong for them, it can lead to catastrophe very quickly because there's no family resources.
If we didn't have lawyers who were assisting people with legal issues, it will actually bog down the system. On an annual basis, we open 24,000 cases.
The amount of cases that we handle is incredible, but we're able to do that because we are so collaborative.
As a community, we have an obligation to allow people to have full access to the courts.
Legal aid is the great equalizer. Justice for a few is not justice, period. We base our court system on advocacy. Legal aid provides skilled advocates for people who cannot afford to hire them, and therefore I think contributes to having a just society.
Okay, so before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of issues, legal issues, and housing law here in Georgia, let's talk about why this matters. Why is this important? So you look at this graphic, when we talk about housing, it affects so many different areas of someone's life. Health, if someone's living with poor housing conditions such as mold, that's going to affect their health. That's going to affect their income because they're not able to work. Stability, if someone's having to move constantly. Education, what school district does a child go to? How often is that child having to move from district to district? Community participation, access to transportation, how close are you to certain places? So that's just a few of the things that are affected by housing, but there's just so many things, and that's why this topic is just so important. So let's start with the numbers. I want to give you guys a few numbers just to kind of give you an introduction to how things are right now. So first, can I do a quick poll? If you are a Cobb County resident, raise your hand. Okay, and if you're a Fulton County resident, raise your hand. Okay, so most of you are Cobb residents. So according to a 2018 report from NLIHC, the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Metro Atlanta is around $1,031. To afford that rent, a worker would need to earn $3,437 a month. Atlanta is at the top of the list for lack of affordable housing when you talk about the country as a whole. It's a problem. There's a website called Eviction Lab that any of you can go to, and it's a really great website because it maps out all of the US by county, by cities, and shows eviction statistics. And when we look at data from 2016, in Fulton County, an average of 29 evictions were filed every day. And when we look at Cobb, an average of 15 evictions were filed every day. So there's a lot of evictions filed. When I go to court, eviction court in Cobb County, the courtroom is full. There is hardly a place to sit. Now let's talk about homelessness. You heard an amazing presentation about people who are experiencing homelessness earlier today. Once every couple of years, HUD requires counties to do something called a point-in-time count, which is, the goal is to try to get a picture of how many homeless people are in the area during that time, that point in time. So over a period of 1 or 2 days, you have volunteers who are collecting that data. So when we talk about Cobb County as an example, you had 178 people in emergency shelter. You had 146 people in transitional housing. And then the count resulted in 127 people who are unsheltered. So that means they are out living under a bridge, they're in a tent, in a forest, they are in their car in a parking lot. Now, as you can imagine, that number is probably not super accurate because it's hard to locate those people and pull them. How are you going to know if someone's sleeping in their car in a parking lot? So you can imagine the number's probably quite higher. So now that we've talked about the numbers, let's talk about the stories. I talk to so many people every week, every day, every month who are experiencing issues with housing. So one of the most common complaints we get are repair issues. My landlord will not make repairs. This can be something as simple as there's a leak in my sink, or it can be really, really bad. So let me give you some examples. Roach infestations. I cannot use my kitchen because when I open the refrigerator, roaches crawl out. I am scared to let my children sleep alone because I walked in the other day and there was a roach crawling on my daughter's face. No air conditioning in the middle of summer in Atlanta. Raw sewage coming up from the plumbing system. The ceiling's about to cave in. I'm scared to even go into my living room. There's mold. I'm getting sick. It smells. My furniture has mold growing on it. Those are just a few of the common, very common stories that we hear on a daily basis at Legal Aid. Another common client story we hear about is there's some reason that they were late on rent. So maybe that's involuntarily job loss. I was laid off. I'm sick and I couldn't work because of the mold in my apartment. There was a death in my family, whatever it is. And now, because I'm a couple days late, my landlord is charging me a $100 late fee, a $200 eviction filing fee, attorney's fees, and they want me to prepay next month's rent. I can't afford that. I'm going to be evicted, I'm going to be homeless, and if I could just have a little bit of time to catch up, then I could do that. But all of these fees are just crippling. So those are some stories that we hear. Of course, we hear a lot of stories, but those are probably the most common stories I hear from clients. So now I'm going to go over some common things that I hear from people who call us, from people in the community, from the media, that are misperceptions about housing issues and illustrate what the problems are for you guys. So the court is required to provide tenants an attorney. So you can imagine if you're a tenant and you're being evicted and you're facing homelessness, you are terrified. You're having to go to court. You've never been to court before. The landlord has an attorney. You don't have an attorney. And you may imagine, well, can the court just appoint me an attorney? I'm low income. Well, in Georgia, that would only apply to a criminal case, like a public defender. In Georgia, tenants don't get free attorneys. So really, the only practical option is legal aid, my organization. But of course, we're a nonprofit. We have limited resources, so we can't represent everyone that calls us in eviction court. An attorney is expensive. And if there's a tenant who's facing eviction, it's extremely unlikely that they're going to be able to afford an attorney. Probably next to impossible. So that presents a whole lot of problems with access to justice issues. Informing tenants about what their rights are, how to present legal arguments in court, legal advice. We run an eviction clinic to explain that to people. So that's a common misperception, is that tenants are going to be appointed an attorney. Anyone who is homeless can find a housing program. So maybe you see someone on the street begging for money and you assume, well, I'm sure there's a program that they could find. This is their choice. Well, we have some amazing nonprofits in Cobb County and the metro Atlanta area, but there needs to be more, of course. And so we talk about shelters, and you heard earlier in the day about how that's not always ideal. Then you think about someone with children, that makes it even more not ideal. Then we talk about Section 8, right? Like subsidized housing. But the truth to that is that in order for someone to get a Section 8 voucher, they have to go on a wait list and wait years to get that voucher. And that's when the wait list is open. The wait list only opens once every couple of years to begin with. So although there are some options out there, it's not so simple as, well, you just need to go and get in this program. Cobb County has a great system called Continuum of Care, which is basically nonprofits, it's funded by HUD, trying to best serve someone who's facing immediate homelessness. And the last I checked, there were around, I believe, a little over 300 people on that list that they just can't find a program for. So it's just simply not true that there's these amazing programs that someone can go to, because resources are limited. They just want to live somewhere for free. So maybe a tenant was late on their rent, they're getting evicted, and maybe there's a misperception like, well, obviously you have to pay your rent. Well, it's not so simple. First of all, lack of affordable housing. We talked about that. When someone is paying such a high percentage of their income in rent, just the littlest thing can completely ruin their financial situation that month. Georgia doesn't have a grace period for rent payments. Some states do, Georgia does not. So there's no, well, you'll have at least a week to catch up on the rent. Maybe someone is disabled and they're on Social Security. Sometimes they're only getting around $700, and I think it's $71 is the current amount, the minimum. Where are they going to find that they can afford? So saying that someone just wants to live somewhere for free, that's not really the whole picture. A lot of times someone is in eviction court because they have gotten fed up with a landlord not making repairs and they've withheld rent. So let's talk about that. So a lot of other states have certain laws that allow tenants to not pay rent if a landlord is not making repairs. Sometimes I hear people say to me, well, can't I just put it in my escrow account? That's not a thing in Georgia. In Georgia, even if your landlord's not making repairs, as a tenant, you're still required to pay rent. And you could imagine that creates a lot of problems for people. If you have a tenant who's tried to get their landlord to make repairs, it's not happening, what are they left with? They could file a lawsuit and seek money from their landlord. But again, that's not going to give them an immediate remedy. It's, you got to file a lawsuit. That's complicated. They could move out, right? Well, a lot of leases have an early termination penalty. So now they're being charged thousands of dollars for breaking their lease early. So as a last resort, maybe the tenant gets so fed up and says, well, I'm just not paying rent. There's mold everywhere. There's raw sewage coming up. Why should I pay rent for this? And so then the landlord files an eviction, and they end up in eviction court. So Georgia recently enacted a new law, which the goal is to prohibit retaliation from landlords. Because, as you may imagine, maybe a tenant complains too much, insists on repairs being made, landlord doesn't like that, and retaliates. So what this new law does, just to give you a summary, examples of retaliation would be filing an eviction after a tenant requests repairs, increasing rent after a tenant requests repairs, or files a code enforcement complaint, terminating the lease early. So those are some things that it prevents. But there are some exceptions which really do affect a lot of tenants. One exception is if the tenant isn't paying rent. So if the tenant hasn't paid rent because maybe they're withholding rent, maybe they use that to spend money to make repairs themselves, then the law doesn't protect them. Another issue is if the lease is just expiring and the landlord's just simply not renewing it, that's not a problem under the law, so that's okay. So there are some problems, but it's definitely a step in the right direction for sure. What it does is it provides a defense to a tenant at an eviction hearing, and it also provides a claim for them to seek monetary damages against that landlord. So I think I messed up my slides. Ooh. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. So the next one is they should just move, right? I hear this all the time. Why don't you just move if it's so bad? Well, it's not that easy as you would imagine, and I'll tell you why. First of all, moving takes time. Moving is very expensive, very expensive. As a tenant, you're having to get a security deposit, first month's rent, moving expenses like a moving truck, movers. That's a lot for someone to come up with, especially if they're already going through a financial hardship or there's already money they've spent on repairs, whatever the case may be. A lot of people assume, well, can't you just use that security deposit from your current landlord? Well, it's not that easy. So under Georgia law, a landlord has up to 30 days to return a security deposit. And they don't have to return a security deposit if the tenant owes money, such as an early termination fee. So if that tenant's leaving early, landlord's going to say, I'm not giving you back your deposit. You actually owe me money. Stability for children. I'm a parent, my child's in the middle of their semester, and I want to find a place that's in the same school district so they can attend the same school. I don't want to have to move 20 miles away. So for a variety of reasons, it's not so easy just to move. One major thing is credit reports. So when someone, a tenant, potential tenant, applies for an apartment complex, they have to do an application. And that complex is most likely going to be using a tenant screening company to give them a report on whether or not they should rent to that tenant. How much of a risk is that tenant? And so evictions are going to pop up on that report. Evictions, maybe early termination fees that are owed, and that can actually prevent someone from getting an apartment. And so now it's even harder to move. Now maybe that tenant's having to move to maybe a not so great apartment, and now they're experiencing conditions again. Criminal records. A lot of apartment complexes won't accept individuals with certain criminal records. So there's a whole lot that goes into just simply moving. It's not always so simple for tenants. So now we get to, what is the solution? Well, obviously there's no easy solution, or I wouldn't be here today. I'm an attorney, so like most attorneys, my solution is to litigate, to sue, but that's not always enough. Solution, so affordable housing, increasing access to affordable housing is a huge one. Supporting nonprofits in the community. Continuing to do outreach for tenants so tenants know their rights. That's a big one. What are the other solutions? Well, I mean, I could probably talk to you guys for hours about possible ways things could be changed, but it's a bigger issue. And so when we talk about access to justice, it's so multifaceted. And today I've talked to you guys about some of the cases that we see at Legal Aid, and hopefully I've given you an overview of what are those issues a tenant faces with access to justice here in Georgia. And I hope that we can move forward with trying to increase or improve access to justice so that when I'm getting a call from someone who's in just a horrible situation, perhaps I have some better news for them, some better advice. So that's all I have, but thank you so much for letting me speak today.